All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are back. This will be sections 7 and 8 of Unit 2. And in these two sections, we're going to be looking at the southern colonies and we will be looking at the back country. And so to go ahead and kind of jump right in, the southern colonies, of course, here on the southern edge of the 13 colonies. We have Maryland, we have Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. Inevitably, someone always says, Georgia looks kind of odd. Yes, it's not the full Georgia state that we think of. This is just a small slice of that. We'll talk about why that's so a little bit later, but this area is all we're going to be talking about. Southern colonies are going to be a little bit different than the New England and the middle colonies. They're going to be wealthy, and their wealth is going to be based on cash crop agriculture. We've already talked about what a cash crop is. It's a crop grown to make money. Typically, it's not something you eat, but rather it's a luxury good. And so that means it's something you want, not necessarily something you have to have, but it is something you're going to be willing to pay a lot of money for. So in this case, we're talking about tobacco, which we've already discussed, but also things like rice and sugar. Yes, I know you can eat rice and sugar, but also indigo, which is a blue dye. Things like hemp are going to be cash crops. All of those are going to be very important to the South. Now, in addition to that, there's a couple of things that go along with that. First of all, we've already talked about cash crops require a great deal of labor. This means that indentured servitude is going to be common in the South, but also slavery is going to become the most common form of labor in the South. Cash crops also require a lot of land to be profitable. You have to grow a lot of it. It actually exhausts the soil, and you have to keep planting new fields. And so you're going to get a very spread out, sparse population. You're also going to have a very monolithic culture. What I mean by that is there's only really one group of people there. That's the English. The only other group of people who are going to be there are African slaves. So they are not a very diverse region. They are also, because you're taking large amounts of land and you have very wealthy people in control, there aren't really a lot of jobs because the slaves do the labor. So there's not a lot of reason for people to move there to get a job. So you're not going to have a lot of large cities. The large cities you do have are going to be right here on the coast. And that's how you're going to get rid of your cash crops. You're going to ship them out from these coastal cities to go to England. The people who primarily go here are going to be single young men looking to make it rich. Women are going to go a little bit later, but this means that families are going to be relatively small. The population is going to remain low, and there's going to be a lot of disease. You're out here kind of dealing with swampy areas. You're going to have a lot of mosquitoes, a lot of yellow fever, malaria, things like that. And this is also going to translate into a shorter lifespan. We're going to look at Maryland very, very quickly. What you need to know about Maryland is it's a refuge, a haven, a safe place for Catholics. By now, you should have picked up on the fact that Catholics aren't welcome in too many places, either in England or the 13 colonies. Maryland is going to be one of the few places that it will be Catholicism will be accepted. And after the Act of Toleration in 1649, you had total religious freedom for all Christians. And so it didn't matter if you were Catholic or Protestant or Anglican or Lutheran or whatever. You could go to Maryland and find safety. But no Jews. Unlike Pennsylvania or New York, Jewish people were not accepted in Maryland. Moving on to South Carolina, we've already talked about Virginian death when we talked about Jamestown. South Carolina is going to become one of the wealthiest of the colonies very, very quickly. And the Carolinas actually started as one colony, but quickly break up into North and South. They are going to be plantation colonies. large amounts of land owned by the very wealthy planters, poor whites who owned very little. There are going to be a lot of slaves in North and South Carolina to solve that labor problem, to work on those plantations. In fact, two of the cash crops that South Carolina is best known for is not tobacco. Tobacco needs relatively humid conditions but dry soil. South Carolina is definitely humid, but it has damp, sandy soil. What grows great in those regions? Sugar and rice. Sugar and rice is going to flourish in South Carolina, and it requires a great deal more labor than even tobacco does. So South Carolina is going to become a very wealthy colony very, very quickly. Our final colony in the South is Georgia, and it starts out much differently than any of our other 13 colonies. It doesn't start for religious freedom or religious toleration. It doesn't start because of political freedom or representation. It doesn't start for economics. It's totally different. Georgia starts out as a prison colony. A prison colony. Back in England at the time, it was against the law to be a debtor. So, for example, I owed a great deal of money. We're not talking about owing $5 to your neighbor. We're talking about owing hundreds of dollars. And so if you were in debt a great deal, you would be put in prison until your debt was paid off. I want to say that again. You would be put in prison until your debt was paid off. Now, we all kind of have figured out that's pretty much impossible. So your prison population keeps increasing as the debtors keep being imprisoned. And so the guy who starts the Georgia colony, a guy by the name of Oglethorpe, goes to the king and says, hey, look, why don't you let me empty out the English prisons, take these debtors, let me take them to a new colony in the Americas. Let's put that colony between the very wealthy colony of South Carolina and the threatening colony of Spanish Florida. They were very worried about the Spanish in Florida invading the wealthy colony of South Carolina and taking it over. So Georgia is a buffer colony. It's going to be populated by prisoners, essentially, debtors. And they are going to go and work off their debt to society, being in Georgia. So Georgia starts out very different, has a totally different viewpoint. Yes, it's about making wealth, but it's more important about let's do something good and protect the Spanish, or protect the other English colonies from the Spanish. So that kind of ends our section on the southern colonies. At this time, we're going to transfer into section 8, and this is about the back country. And this is going to be a little bit different than what we've talked about. If you can see on the map, of course, New England in purple, middle in yellow, and the southern colonies in orange. The area we're going to talk about is this area right in here, the back country. It is not part of our typical settlement. It is quite honestly the frontier, the middle of nowhere, the wilderness. If you see this line right here, this is called the fall line, this red line. And what that means is this is the furthest extent a boat can go up the rivers into the interior. And so really what that means is once you reach this point, it becomes too steep, too rocky, because you are in what's called the Piedmont, which are rolling hills and mountains that lead into the Appalachians. And so you can't go any further by boat upriver, so you have to get out and walk. The Piedmont's going to become very settled. It's great farmland, but you get to the Appalachians, it's rocky. What we're talking about is beyond the Appalachians. And the people who are going to go live here are going to be poor. They can't afford land. So settlers arrive in North Carolina or South Carolina or Virginia. They can't buy their own land or be given land for whatever reason. Their really only option is to keep moving westward until they can find a piece of land to call their own. And one group that we know for sure is really kind of big in the back country are the Scots Irish. Now, really quick, a very brief lesson on the Scots-Irish. They lived in Scotland for a time. They moved to Ireland. After about 100 years, their great-grandchildren moved back to Scotland. They're Scots and they're Irish. They're the Scots-Irish. The thing with the Scots-Irish is when they get back to Scotland, Scotland is ruled by the English, by the British, whom they hate. The British and the Scots-Irish do not get along. They don't get along politically. They don't get along economically. They do not get along religiously. And so the Scots or Irish are going to want to leave Scotland, come to the Americas to get away from British rule. But you're saying to yourself right now, hey, self, they want to be away from British rule, but they're coming to an English colony. That's true. But think about what I just said. They're moving past the typical settlement of the area. They're going where there are no cities. There is no law. They're going to where they can do their own thing. Okay? They don't want people telling them what to do. They are very independent people. They rely on their close friends. They rely on their family. There's a big sense of family loyalty here. But other than that, no one's going to tell them what to do. They are going to live in large family groups. And the conditions out here require that because it is so dangerous. It is very harsh. You have bear, you have mountain lions, you have wolves and coyotes. You have all kinds of poisonous snakes. You have lots of dangerous threats. And perhaps the most dangerous are the Native American people who live in this area and do not want white settlers out here. So they typically have to rely on their family for protection for their own good. They're going to live in log cabins. Log cabins were pretty common in some of the other colonies too, but only for a short time until they had processed lumber where they could build frame lumber homes. In the backcountry, that didn't happen for a while. So those log cabins are going to be very common. Something else that they lacked in the backcountry was actual real money. And so they rely on a trade economy. And that happens. I have pigs, for example, and Johnny over here has corn. And he comes to me and says, hey, I'll trade you 5 baskets or bushels of corn for a hog because I want bacon because, bacon's good. And so we trade those things. Another thing that was often traded were furs or hides or skins. And probably the biggest critter out here that was harvested for its skin were deer. And so deer skins were often a medium of exchange in this trade economy. Hey, instead of that corn, you know what? I need 5 deer skins because I need to make some clothes, or I need the skins to make something else. And so I'll say I'll take 5 deer skins for my hog. But saying deer skin is kind of cumbersome. It gets your tongue gets wrapped around it. So what could we call it instead of a deer skin? Maybe just a skin? That doesn't sound right. Well, what's a slang term for a deer? A male deer is called a buck. So, hey, I'll give you a hog for 5 buck skins. But people are lazy. They're not going to say the whole term. So eventually it becomes, I'll give you that hog for 5 bucks. 5 bucks. And if you take that deer skin into the city over in this region, you could trade that in for $1. So a buckskin was worth $1. So that's where we get that origin of today's money of $1 is a buck. So real brief there. So here are our log cabins, kind of the Lincoln log style log cabins from your childhood. Guys, it's really harsh. It's really hard living. And so you get the idea. And finally, end on the picture of our Scots-Irish moving out into the wilderness. Guys, these people are poor. All of their belongings are on horseback or in packs or on a wagon. And they're moving together in kinship groups. So this could be potentially maybe 2 or 3 large families all moving together. And someone always says, what's the deal with all the guys carrying a rifle all the time? The guys, they have to be on the lookout for wild animals. They have to be on the lookout for ambush by natives who don't want them there. So this is all a very real danger for these people going into the back country. As we finish, you should be reflecting on the people who came to America and settled in the 4 regions we've talked about: the New England colonies, the middle colonies, southern colonies, and the back country. Think about their religious experience in those 4 areas. More importantly, think about how they're going to make their living in those 4 areas. Also think about, in each area, we have the beginnings of representative democracy, people having a voice in their government. And that's going to be really, really important as we move through to the American Revolution in upcoming chapters. That's going to end us for Unit 2.